Hello, my name is Lisa Irving. What I'm going to do with you today is I'm going to take you through the second segment in the teacher upskilling workshops that have been run in Auckland, Rotorua, Wellington, Christchurch and Dunedin over the past couple of weeks. This particular segment looks at the new assessment resources that have been developed for schools for the Certificates of Achievement 1, 2, 3 and 4 for cookery. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to take you through the background, and the background for this is relative to the Assessment Resources project. Then we're going to look at the changes that have been made to the Certificate of Achievement assessment resources themselves. Third is the benefits that I see as a result of those changes. And then I'm going to walk you through Certificates of Achievement 2 and 4. I'm going to do it in that order, so 2 first, 4 second. With the walkthrough with number 2 is it will show you the model that's been used as the basis for the assessment resources, and then we're going to look at 4 second. Because of the range items in those standards, I've had to slightly alter the model. So 2 first, 4 second, and then we'll visit the frequently asked questions, or the questions that most teachers asked during the roadshows. So the background to this project was that HSI came to me in June of this year and said that we want to look at our assessment resources. Their main intention was to simplify the assessment resources, and in consultation with them, they also wanted to have them be audience driven versus generic resources. I added another dimension to that, which was to move away from prescription assessment towards mapped assessment. So prescription assessment is where you, for example, with cookery, you would be asked for evidence that a student could cook 2 portions of lamb kebabs. That's a prescription. So if you follow that prescribed assessment, you'll get a particular outcome. So what I've suggested is that we move away from prescription assessment towards mapped assessment. So mapped assessment basically works on the premises of a map, which is why it's called mapped assessment. And you follow the map and you use different ways to get to the end outcome. So the focus of the project is going to be both on industry and schools versus training providers. Training providers have, over the past 2 years, been encouraged to develop their own assessment resources. So the focus of the Assessment Resources project is very squarely based in schools and industry. Time frame for the project was 6 months, June 2012 to December 2012. The current status of the project is that it's been extended for a further 6 months through to June 2013. So the changes that have been made to the resources is firstly the size of the resources. You'll see that they are significantly reduced. The HSI information and introduction clutter has been removed. Unit standard information has also been removed. This information is freely available on the NZQA website, which is why the standard information has been removed from the resources. The assessor schedules have also been removed from the resources. Pre-moderation matrices have also been removed. As an assessor, you're not expected to know how the assessment resources have achieved pre-moderation. You're expected to know that they have achieved pre-moderation. The pre- and post-assessment agreements, these have also changed. There is no longer a pre-assessment agreement. Any school, any child that attends a high school in New Zealand already agrees to being assessed at the beginning of their academic learning commencement. The post-assessment agreement has changed. This is where the student signs to say that they have been assessed, they know the outcome of that assessment, and they have been given feedback. Along with the removal of the pre- and post-assessment agreements, the student is no longer required to write their name and NZQA number at the top of each page of the assessment. The feel of the resources have changed. These are now much more end-user focused. So all unit standard speak has been removed from the assessments, as has the signposting in the form of performance criteria numbers, so 1.1, 1.2. The wording in the individual assessor and assessment resources has also changed. No longer do the resources speak to the generalist, they speak to the reader. So you'll see that the assessor's resource talks to the assessor and the student's resource talks to them as the student. The language of the resources have also changed. So in the past, resources have referred to the student, the learner, the candidate, the trainee. So rather than using those terms together in a resource, now the resources are written for one specific person. And in this case, it's written for the student, being a school student. The usability of the resources has also completely changed. The questions that are asked have been extrapolated, and you'll see these when I walk through the resources with you. So instead of having double, triple, quadruple barreled questions, which the student gets to the first part of the question and only answers the first part, provision has been made within the resources so that they answer all of the parts of the questions. The practical performance expectations have also changed. And as we go through the resources, you'll see that no longer are these performance criteria by performance criteria, they are now task-based. The evidence that's required is also been not so much changed, but it has been clarified so that when you present material for post-moderation, you have confidence that you have the required evidence. The feedback in the resources. Currently in the resources you are expected to write assessment summary feedback, make comment around each of the performance criteria, and then also give feedback relative to each of the tasks. This has also changed. And the performance criteria, the way that it is written, has completely changed. In the past, performance criteria has been taken directly from the unit standard and put into the assessment resources. These new resources use progressional performance criteria versus unit standard-based performance criteria. Okay, looking at the benefits. Now, these are the benefits that I see. For the student, smaller assessment resources mean that they're going to be much more approachable for the student. Typically when you present a student with half a forest or a small tree of assessment resources, they disengage. So this is the hope here, is that they will engage much more readily with these resources. The layout is much clearer, cleaner, and it's logical. And the language of the resource has changed. So now, instead of having it in unit standard speak, it's in cookery speak. So words that they will understand and that are part of the context of the resource. The resource enables the student to take responsibility for the evidence collection. Now, typically teachers have taken that responsibility. I'm a huge advocate of shifting that responsibility to the student. So the evidence charts in the resource enable that to happen. The theory has been simplified for not only for comprehension, but it's also been simplified in volume. In the majority, these assessment resources are written around practical unit standards. So in the past, the thinking has been that there should be one question per performance criteria. That thinking has changed. Now we're looking for evidence around their practical skills and some underpinning knowledge, so that they understand the why and the how of the tasks that they're performing. There's a lot more flexibility with mapped assessment versus prescription assessment. And the hope there is that the assessments now will become fun and the students will be able to take some ownership of the dishes and the menu items that they're cooking. For the assessor, there's much more clarity, there's much less clutter around exactly what is required. Comments are no longer required. Assessment summary feedback is no longer required. What we're looking for now is feedback for the task or around the tasks that the student has performed rather than element or performance criteria feedback. The supplementary evidence has been clarified, so we'll look at that shortly when we look at the evidence charts. The practical abilities capture tool, this has been consolidated. So as a teacher, when you're expected to present to a parent what this pupil has achieved during the year or during the term, instead of showing them multiple pages, I've changed the capture tool so that it's now only one or two pages, which gives you an entire student's performance. There's also much more flexibility within the resources. There are 10 deciles within New Zealand's schooling system. In a decile 1 school, they don't have access to iFillet steak. In a decile 10, they may have access to high quality ingredients. The cultures are different within different schools. Some cultures are predominantly one particular ethnicity or two particular ethnicities. This enables you to cook dishes specific to those cultures. Ingredient seasonality is a major for schools because it significantly affects your budgets. So by allowing you to choose the recipes that you will cook in satisfaction of the unit standards, it enables you to work differently with budgets. And the last difference that I also the last different benefit that I see is that some schools have different challenges with timing. Some schools try to work assessment into one 50-minute period. Some have double periods. Some don't take assessment anywhere near the classroom. They use it for events. So again, with mapped assessment, you've got greater control over what you're cooking, what it's costing, and the assessment conditions within which it's done. There were 13 questions that were asked repeatedly from each of the each of the upskilling workshops. So what we've done is we've brought you the answers to those 13 questions. It's understandable that you will have further questions. However, these are the questions that the majority of teachers asked during the workshops. No, the assessment resources are available under the Schools tab on the HSI website, solely for viewing purposes only, not in any other capacity. Yes, the student workbooks have been updated, as have the PowerPoint slides. These are available through the HSI normal distribution channels. Yes, all the Cookery Schools resources have been updated. So this is resources 1, 2, 3 and 4. Please be aware that the unit standard inclusions in the Certificate of Achievement 3 have changed. These now include standards 15919, hot finger food, standard 15920, sauce and soups, 15921, cake, sponge and scones, and 21059, which is demonstrate knowledge of knife handling. If you have already ordered old, or if you have in your schools, old Certificate of Achievement Cookery Schools resources, you can return these to HSI. You must return them in the pairs that they were issued to you in, and no part packs will be accepted. HSI will then raise credit, and then they will replace those old resources with the new resources. Yes, you are able to get the new Certificate of Achievement Cookery Schools resources for 2013. You can order them this year, 2012, and delivery will occur early 2013. Yes, you are able to get a teacher copy earlier than normal. These can be ordered from HSI via the normal ordering process. Currently, the only assessment resources that have been updated are cookery schools 1, 2, 3 and 4. More assessment resources are being written, and as they are completed and available for use, this information will be available in your school's newsletter. The assessment resources are available only as a pack or a set because they are designed to work together. So included in this set is the student workbook and the student assessment book. Yes, whilst they will be smaller, they're not going to cost less. There will be a marginal increase in 2013, and that's primarily because of printing and paper costs. This is an integrated assessment tool. If a student doesn't achieve all of the standards within the assessment resource, they will be unable to gain the certificate of achievement. Currently, in HSI assessment resources, you are asked to assess the student twice on 2 separate occasions. If you are using HSI resources other than the newly developed cookery schools resources, then you will be expected to follow the assessment instructions in those assessment tools. Unit standards at level 1 and 2 can be assessed in a simulated environment. The student must be under realistic time pressures, and the end user must have the same expectations as a paying customer. So the teacher has those expectations. In an ideal world, if they can be assessed in realistic workplace environments such as cafes or restaurants, so this could be during events that school runs, that would be fantastic. Hospitality unit standards at level 3 or above must be assessed in realistic workplace environments or commercially suitable environments. These stipulations are set out occasionally in the unit standards themselves, but always in conjunction with the ITO's consent for moderation requirements, or their CMR. If you are going to use photographs as evidence to support a student's achievement, then that's a suitable way of providing supplementary evidence. If 2 portions are asked for in the assessment, then the photographs that you include must show both of the portions. Okay, so start, if you will, with the assessor guide on your left and the student guide on your right. This is the way it's being presented to you visually. Go first to page 3, so that's Roman numeral 3, of each of the resources. This is the contents page, and what this does is this sets out the model that's been used to write the resources. So you'll see there's an introduction page, an assessment guide, this is where the evidence is, theory questions, practical cookery observations, and then a sign-off. And this is the same model that's been used throughout all of these resources. If you turn over the page to the next page, which is Roman numeral 4, this is the introduction page, and here is the all-important credit value total that all students are interested in. And you will see there is a box in the top left-hand corner which directs you off to where the unit standard information can be found, which is on the NZQA website. That is the end of the introduction for this resource. If you have a look at the facing page, which is Roman numeral 5, In the assessment guide, it says discuss the student's assessment book with them before they begin the assessments. You'll see here that the book speaks to the assessor. If you have a look at the student book, it says your teacher/instructor will talk you through this assessment book. So the books are speaking to the reader versus the generic audience. Now you'll see that teacher has been paired with instructor. And the reason why this has been done in these resources is because not only do schools use these resources, but so does New Zealand's prison services. So looking back on the assessment guide, the rest of the guide is talk about the book with the student, here are the methods, questions and observation, sign it off. You may or may not use the reporting system that's in the back of the books. You may use your own school system, which is KMAR or an equivalent. And if the student is not in agreement with your assessment decision, then they should follow the school's appeals policy. So that's the preliminary done with respect to the assessment resources. Looking now at the evidence chart, Roman numeral 6 in both of the books. Direct you first to the Assessor's Guide. This evidence chart is set up in 2 columns. In the left-hand column, this is the evidence the student must provide, and this is where the beginning of the mapping starts. So you'll see that task 1 are the student's answers, and task 2 sets out the practical items or dishes that the student is expected to cook in satisfaction of the unit standards. So you'll see they're expected to provide 2 servings of a dish where the meat or fish has been grilled. So servings is interchangeably used with the word portion. So 2 servings of a dish where the vegetables have been grilled, a fruit salad, a vegetable salad, and a pasta or rice salad. The dishes that you ask the student to cook are totally your call. So if you want to use a Women's Institute cookbook with traditional country recipes in it, that's your choice. If you're a Donna Hay convert and you like her recipes, that's your choice. If you want to stay with the industry text, the New Zealand chef, that's again your choice. These assessment resources are using a new technique called shadowing assessment, and what that basically means is the assessment, the primary tasks have a shadow behind them, or they leave a shadow, and in the shadow are the skills that happen naturally as part of the primary tasks. So here, sitting in the shadow, are knives and also food safety, and not just food safety but also the way the person works in the kitchen. Going across to the second column, this is the evidence that the school student could provide. So they could provide a recipe, they could provide a work plan, or they could provide a photograph. The authentication that we require for any of those pieces of supplementary evidence is documented at the top of the page under where it says could provide. So the student is asked to sign the recipe, work plan or temperature chart or photograph to prove it is theirs. In the same column, to demonstrate the shadowed skills, we're asking for either a photograph, a temperature chart, so that again we can get evidence of those skills being observed. If you go now to page 1 of the resources, and this is where the theory questions start, you'll see in the student workbook that I've removed all NZQA jargon speak like open book, closed book. Essentially, the student needs to understand the conditions of the assessment. So what we've said here is that these questions must be answered when their teacher/instructor is with them. They're not able to refer to anything, and they must know the answers. So essentially that's the condition under which they have to give you the answers. If you have a look at the first question, you'll see that it's a large question with multiple parts to it. So now the student has been given the opportunity to answer each of the questions guided by the way the resource asks for their answer. So they have to give you an answer around the cut, the knife, the chopping board and the vegetables. In the past, these assessments have been written with 5 lines for each of the questions, and every question had 5 lines. What I've tried to do is to guide the student by giving you the number of lines to illustrate the extent to which the answer should be provided. Question 2, similarly, is also a multiple part question, and again you can see that it's been extrapolated out. The questions finish on page 3 of the resource. So for these 4 unit standards, there are a total of 10 questions. If you have a look at the bottom of page 3 for the student workbook, you'll see it says Assessment Task 1, and you'll see a box. Now this is where the feedback is required, and it's task-driven feedback. So the task that the students just completed is their theoretical knowledge. So this is what your feedback would relate to. So feedback should be specific, meaningful and constructive, and should be in narrative form. So if, for example, a student hasn't achieved for some parts of one of the 10 questions, then the resource is written from an optimistic viewpoint rather than a pessimistic viewpoint. So optimistic insofar as that it is assumed that this child will achieve versus that the child won't achieve, and there's provision for their non-achievement. So there's flexibility within the resources. If you do have a situation where you've got an FER, then you would simply draw a line under where it says date, achieved, not achieved, in the teacher instructions, and then document the next assessment occasion. Now you may be looking at that column that says A/NA. NZQA changed their outcome speak a year ago, and instead of competent and not yet competent, we now have achieved or not achieved. So this change was not made public, so you can be forgiven for not knowing that this change was made. Turning over and looking at page 4 of the student workbook, you'll see that this is the prelim to the practical task. 3 bullet points. First is it says that this is what your teacher will observe you cooking. You can use different recipes to those that are provided, and you must make them to the standard required of the recipe. And that's what sets out the expectation for the student. The judgment statements referring back to the assessor's book says that the student's been observed and that they've met the standard and that you've given them task-specific feedback. Looking now at page 5 of the student resource, you'll see that across the top there is provision here for where to write the recipe that you've used for grilled meat or fish, the grilled vegetable dish, the fruit salad, the vegetable salad, and the rice or pasta salad. The date that the dish was cooked, and then the boxes that follow underneath that are for your ticks or crosses. So there is no expectation that you will document comments here. Going across to where it says the student, these are in effect your judgment statements around the student's competence. So this is where you'll see that they run in progression. So the student presents correctly for the kitchen environment, which is the first thing they would naturally have to do when they enter the kitchen. Then they get the equipment that they're going to need. They prepare their work surface, they gather enough ingredients. They prepare the ingredients correctly and they follow the recipe, and they consistently demonstrate the personal habits and work habits that prevent cross-contamination. So now you're starting to see how 167, how food safety has been incorporated into the resource. Going over the page, they produce an item or a dish that meets the quality requirements of the recipe. They finish it, they put away the stuff they've been using, they clean up, and they sharpen their knives prior to exiting the kitchen. So The criteria run in progression, and they're no longer on multiple pages. They're on 2 pages, which prevents you having to flick backwards and forwards during the assessments. I'd like you to have a look at the group observation checklists contained in the assessment resource. And these start on page 6. So looking at the group practical observation sheets, what we've done here is we've tried to give you a tool that again prevents you having to flick through the pages. So all of your judgment statements in progression are on 2 pages. Now, we appreciate that you're not assessing such a small quantity of students that's been provided for in this group observation checklist. Again, these resources are able to be tailored for your use. Simply photocopy this sheet, attach it to the right-hand side, and this gives you an extension which then gives you the ability to assess the number of students that you have in your classroom at one time. Once you've used the group observation checklist, you are then expected to transfer the individual student outcomes back into their individual assessment resources. So on page 7 of the student assessment book, this is where you would document your feedback. So you would write the date, the recipe that you've used, circle the achievement achieved NA, and write the feedback. So the feedback here is around the student's performance against the dish. So looking at your judgment statements, this is how you would write your feedback. So the entire student's work for this assessment resource is captured on this one practical outcome tool. Moving to page 8 of the student workbook, this basically is a congratulations page that says you've achieved these unit standards. But the page I particularly would like you to look at is page 9. So 2 things on this page. One is the sign-off tracking sheet. Now what this does is this enables students to keep a track of their achievement. Now for some students who find it challenging with assessment, this gives them confidence insofar as they have achieved a particular dish and they can see what they have achieved and what they have left to achieve. So this is a psychological tool to enable engagement with assessment. The right-hand side of the evidence chart sets out what they are expected to collect in support of their assessment. So they can circle whether it's a recipe they've given you, a work plan, or a photograph. And this again enables them to shift, or enables you to shift the responsibility for the evidence collection to the student. The assessment sign-off is at the bottom, and then your final signature completes the resource. Okay, so now that we've walked through the resources together, or you've thumbed through them and looked at them yourself, the significant change that you will see is that now you are expected to provide evidence that the student has achieved on only one occasion versus on 2 separate occasions 1 week apart, which has been the premise in the past. So if a student cooks a dish to the recipe, to the standard, and meets your judgment statements on 1 occasion, then they have achieved that part of the task. Okay, so now that we've looked at Cookery Schools 2, I want to show you the changes that have been made to the model in Cookery Schools 4. And the reason these changes have been made to Cookery Schools 4 is because of the range items and the standards that are included within this particular certificate of achievement. So if you go to page Roman numeral 4 of the Assessor's Guide, Cookery Schools 4 contains 4 standards. They're all practical standards, and each of these standards have large range items. So to assist you in the mapping process, I'd like you to have a look at page Roman numeral 5. So Roman numeral 5, that page headed up Assessment Guide, sets out what dishes or food items are able to be cooked and some explanatory notes. So the first dish is a vegetable component that has been pan-fried. So any vegetable that would typically be pan-fried is suitable for this dish. The dish should be presented in 2 portions, i.e. 2 servings, and the dish does not need to be a complete meal in itself. It could form part of a menu item. The next dish is where the vegetable has been deep-fried. So, for example, if you deep-fried potatoes, then you would have either wedges or potato chips. And if you put those with deep-fried fish, then that is a meal in itself. So by creating a dish using individual components, this is how you're beginning to integrate your assessment. Coming down the page, you've got a vegetable dish which has been roasted, vegetables which have been roasted, and a dish where the protein component has been pan-fried. Now, don't confuse primary protein with sub-protein. When I mean primary protein, I'm talking about animal protein. So we're talking about meat, fish, chicken, sausages. We're not talking about sub-protein, things like halloumi cheese, dairy. So that's why in the resources it actually stipulates what the protein is: fish, meat, sausages, chicken. The only exception to this rule is if you have a large majority of vegetarian students, and then tofu would be the acceptable whole protein substitute for dishes. If you go over to page Roman numeral 6, we come down to sandwiches. Sandwiches, in the past, has been too hot, too cold. Now we're saying that they can be either hot or cold. You don't just have to make 2 sandwiches or 2 portions of each sandwich. If you were running an assessment for this at an event, then they could be making in excess of 2 portions. Have a look at the vegetable preparation methods and the vegetable cuts. So you're expected to gather evidence around 7 different preparation methods. So cleaning, peeling, slicing, dicing, portioning, grating and segmenting. These are preparation methods that you would do naturally as part of a lot of vegetable preparation. So you're going to see these on a repeatable basis. As far as the vegetable cuts go, what I've tried to do is I've tried to guide you as to how you can gather evidence of these cuts with different recipes. So for example, if you are wanting to get some evidence for chiffonade, then this could be lettuce for sandwiches, or it could be the way vegetables are cut for a stir fry. So these are only suggestions, these are not definitives. If you now turn to the student workbook, and we're going to look at the student workbook for the rest of this session. Have a look at page 1, theory questions. You'll see these theory questions are very brief. This is because there is no theory per se component in each of these standards. So the reason why these theory questions have been included is because they are the level of expectation that an assessor would ask during an assessment. So they can be asked verbally and the answers recorded for the student. The student can also answer these questions themselves. So what they are looking for is they're looking for how and why answers. You'll see they're also grouped differently to the way they have been in the past. So now we have them as frying, roasting, vegetables, and sandwiches. And again, as per assessment for number 2, is at the bottom of page 3, you have the assessment task outcome box, and this is for feedback around the student's underpinning knowledge. I want you now to go to page 6 of the student assessment book. This is the page headed up feedback sheet. And I would like you to have a look at how vegetable dish pan-fried has been presented to you. So here is where you would write the date, the recipe of the dish that the student cooked, whether they achieved it or didn't achieve it. Have a look underneath. This is where you're expected to capture the evidence of the vegetable preparation methods or the vegetable cuts. So for example, if you are cooking a vegetable dish where the student needed to clean, peel, slice and grate the vegetables, those are the methods that you would highlight. So the expectation is that over the or through the recipe choices that you make, that all of these range items will be assessed. Exactly the same premise for the vegetable cuts. So in one particular recipe, you may end up with 3 of the vegetable cuts being satisfied. This form of shadow assessment is used for each of the vegetable dishes, for pan-fried, deep-fried and roasted. It's also available in the sandwich section of the feedback, working on the premise that this is the most likely place that the student would demonstrate these skills. Moving to page 8 of the resource, which is the last page we're going to look at, there is an additional practical cookery observation sheet included here in the student book. Now, the reason this has been done is because it's possible that you may not be able to get all of the vegetable cuts and preparation methods satisfied in the recipes that you choose. So what this does is gives you the extra provision. It clearly says to the student that you'll only be asked to cook these if it is necessary. And that feedback sheet is featured on page 9 of their resource.